Good morning, all. Just a tad late, but that's because we were waiting for you to get in. 34%. That's how much of Sri Lanka's sensitive natural forest cover in the Central Highlands was destroyed by Cyclone Ditwa alone. A single storm that cost an estimated $4.1 billion in damage, which is nearly 4% of the country's GDP. It's a stark reminder of what's at stake in the central and upper watershed area, Sri Lanka's water tower, as it is called, which feeds 23 major river basins, over 100 main rivers, and more than 1,000 feeder streams that sustain water security, agriculture, hydropower, and biodiversity for millions of people. In direct response, Sri Lanka's cabinet just approved a new authority to manage these upper watersheds, a milestone moment for a landscape that has suffered decades of deforestation, soil erosion, and unsustainable land use. Today, under the Asian Development Bank's Serendipity Knowledge Program, we bring together government, global experts, and civil society to explore how we finance this restoration, investing in nature not as a cost, but as capital. So welcome to Investing in Sri Lanka's Upper Watersheds, Unlocking Natural Capital for a Resilient Future. I'd like to invite Ms. Shannon Cowlin, Country Director for Sri Lanka of the ADB, for the formal welcome address.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished representatives of the government of Sri Lanka, colleagues from academia, the private sector, civil society, and development partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Serendipity Knowledge Program event, Investing in Sri Lanka's Upper Watersheds, Unlocking Natural Capital for a Resilient Future. The Serendipity Knowledge Program, or SKOP, was established to bring together knowledge, innovation, and partnerships to help address Sri Lanka's most pressing development challenges. Through SKOP, we connect policymakers, researchers, businesses, development partners, and civil society around ideas that can shape a more resilient and prosperous future for Sri Lanka. Today's event reflects that purpose. We are here to discuss the challenges facing Sri Lanka's upper watersheds and to explore how knowledge, innovation, and investment can be translated into practical solutions at scale. In 2023, ADB held a SKOP event in collaboration with the University of Peradeniya on natural capital and the role that nature and ecosystem services play in supporting economic development. At that time, the discussion largely focused on building awareness and understanding of natural capital as a development issue. Since then, it has been encouraging to see growing interest in natural capital investments. Here in Sri Lanka, this growing momentum is particularly evident in discussions surrounding Sri Lanka's upper watersheds area. Often referred to as the country's water tower, the upper watershed area supplies water to 23 major river basins and supports water security, food production, hydropower generation, biodiversity conservation, tourism, and climate resilience. These ecosystem services underpin economic activity across the country and support the well-being of millions of Sri Lankans. Yet these critical landscapes face increasing pressure. Unsustainable land use, soil erosion, forest degradation, and encroachment have weakened watershed functions and ecosystem services. The impacts of this include higher flood and landslide risks, reservoir sedimentation, lower agricultural productivity, pressure on downstream infrastructure, and growing climate vulnerability. Climate change is amplifying these challenges, and the impacts are not only felt on the environment, but also by communities that live in and depend on the natural capital in these areas for their livelihoods. So the question before us is not whether the upper watersheds are important. The question is, how can Sri Lanka better manage, restore, and invest in them to safeguard and preserve the country's natural capital while bringing benefits and opportunities to the communities living in these areas? Encouragingly, the conversation is evolving. There is growing recognition that healthy watersheds are strategic economic assets that support long-term development. Momentum is also building around the institutions, knowledge, and financing mechanisms needed for their sustainable management. We are seeing interest in integrated approaches to watershed governance, including proposals for an upper watershed area management authority to strengthen coordination across sectors and stakeholders. Discussions around the proposed Climate Action and Nature Positive Investment Fund, or Canopy Fund, also reflect growing recognition that protecting natural capital requires innovative and sustainable financing. These ideas are still in an early stage. Any new institutional or financing mechanism will require broad consultation, strong stakeholder ownership, and careful consideration of community interests. Success will depend on ensuring that local communities, farmers, plantation workers, and other land stewards are protected and share in the benefits generated through sustainable investment. We are also seeing progress on the technical foundations needed for this agenda. The University of Peradeniya and other national institutions are strengthening capabilities in GIS, remote sensing, natural capital assessment, and ecosystem services analysis. A broad coalition of government agencies, universities, development partners, civil society organizations, private sector, and international experts increasingly recognizes that restoring upper watersheds requires collective action and investment at scale. And today's event is intended to contribute to that journey. ADB commissioned 2 complementary studies to strengthen the evidence base for future action. The hydrological assessment undertaken by IMI deepens our understanding of the contribution of upper watersheds to water security, climate resilience, and ecosystem functioning. The economic valuation study examines the value of water and ecosystem services and explores how natural capital can be incorporated into investment and financing decisions. Together, these studies move the discussion from understanding the importance of upper watersheds to identifying practical pathways for investing in them. Globally, countries increasingly recognize nature as productive infrastructure and natural capital investment as a source of economic, social, and environmental returns. Blended finance, payments for ecosystem services, watershed funds, and nature-positive investment platforms are helping mobilize restoration resources at a scale that traditional project financing alone cannot achieve. The proposed Sri Lanka Upper Watershed Ecological Restoration Program is being developed in response to this opportunity. The program seeks to strengthen institutions, to mobilize sustainable financing, and to support investment in ecological restoration and sustainable land management across priority upper watershed landscapes. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion is ultimately about how knowledge can inform policy, how information can unlock investment, and how partnerships can transform natural capital into a foundation for resilience, sustainable livelihoods, and long-term economic prosperity. On behalf of the Asian Development Bank, I would like to thank you for being here today and for your continued partnership and collaboration. I'm very much looking forward to the discussions today and seeing what new collaborations and partnerships emerge. I hope you all have an enjoyable and inspiring morning, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cowlin, for setting the backdrop for the discussions that we will have eventually. Some questions there as well that need to be answered. How do we better manage our watersheds? Hopefully, we will begin from this point, from our keynote address. A Sri Lankan biodiversity scientist, taxonomist, author, and conservationist, widely regarded as one of the country's leading naturalists, He resigned from government office in 1987 to explore Sri Lanka's freshwater fishes, leading to his widely acclaimed first book, Freshwater Fishes of Sri Lanka. He has since discovered and described nearly 150 new species in Sri Lanka, with several vertebrates named in his honor. A Rolex laureate and recipient of the prestigious Lenin Medal, he has also served in senior advisory roles to the government of Sri Lanka and the IUCN's Species Survival Commission, and just launched his book, The Curious Naturalist, which was sold out in just 2 days. Speaking on nature as infrastructure, the urgency of investing in Sri Lanka's nature capital, please welcome Rohan Pettiyagoda.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. What I'm going to do is to very quickly outline the problem, the challenge that faces us, and I think more importantly, look at some of the pitfalls that we're likely to encounter and how we might overcome them. The fundamental problem that faces us in the upper watersheds of Sri Lanka is soil erosion. And this is something that has been studied for at least the last 30 years. People like Professor Tilak Hevavasam, geologist at the University of Peradeniya, have made estimates that we lose between 100 and 7,000 tons of soil from every square kilometer of land in our upper watersheds, depending on the land use. That's the equivalent of about 4 15-ton truckloads of soil being taken from every hectare of land and being dumped in the sea every year. This obviously is unsustainable, which is why many of our upper watershed areas have been reduced to wastelands. So I'm going to divide this into 8 quick little stories. The first one is very short. That is that very often in the media, we see a confusion between the risk of erosion on the one hand and the risk of landslides on the other. I think we need to understand that these are 2 different things altogether. They should not be confused. They involve very different dynamics, and we need to treat them individually as problems that require different approaches. The second thing is that we need to get used to the idea that the highlands are landslide prone. Even in absolutely virgin forests, in the peak wilderness and on the slopes of Piduru Talagala and Totopolakanda, for example, we see areas like this. These masses of tree ferns are an indication that 30, 40, 50 years ago, a landslide occurred in natural forest. These are things that could not have been prevented, and they're absolutely natural. We can see also that this pioneer vegetation, the tree ferns, are quickly being overtaken by other species of vegetation that are coming up under them and will eventually replace them. Even if you look at completely untouched landscapes like the World's End cliff, you can see evidence of landslides right across the cliff face. This is a natural process. The topography of Sri Lanka has been created by erosion and by landslides. What we are faced with now is a huge acceleration of those processes, giving us landscapes that look like this at Hanthana. Many people blame the tea industry for this crisis because the tea industry is the largest single land user in the upper watershed regions. But tea is not by itself to blame. It is the neglect of tea that has caused the problem to accelerate. And that is largely the fault of successive governments over the last 60 years who have allowed this to happen, because these lands are owned by the government, let's face it. Pictures like the one you just saw in the introductory slide and like this are really unusual. Landslides in the tea landscape are very rare indeed. And part of the reason for that is that good agricultural practices, the practices that the tea industry enforces across most of its land, result in much lower silt loads being carried in heavy rainfall because of good drainage, because of mulch cover on the ground, and because of a very nearly closed canopy. But there has been a historical problem. If you drive up from Ginnagathena to Norelia on the roadside, which is almost entirely tea, you see tea bushes like this, and clear evidence from the rooting pattern, from the place where the roots start branching out, that they've lost about 30 centimeters of topsoil. That is millions of years worth of topsoil, because soil is created very slowly. Here again, we have a little paradox, because in the old days, tea used to be planted from seedlings. Seedlings have very deep taproots, which really help stabilize the soil. Sri Lankan landscapes, especially in the mountains, have very shallow topsoil layers. And as a result of that, the vegetatively propagated tea that we've been replanting over the past half century tends to have quite shallow roots. Notwithstanding that, tea has not been altogether a bad thing on these slopes. We could have chosen worse crops. In fact, as you see around Norelia, we have chosen bad crops by way of vegetable cultivation, for example. Because tea provides very nearly a closed canopy across the landscape. And if you do the drainage in tea lands properly, according to the modern agricultural practices, there's very little silt that is washed from them. At the same time, given that the government has decided or is on the verge of deciding to do two important things, as Shannon mentioned. Firstly, to set up an upper watershed management authority, and secondly, to set up a fund that will empower the authority. We need to think carefully about integrating the tea industry into the management authority. Not that they should be the same thing, but they should be partners. They should act synergistically and not antagonistically. The authority should not be the regulator of the RPCs, but use the RPCs to achieve its own goals. The reason I say this is because in these rural areas, the regional plantation companies, there are only 20 of them, have amazing human capital. They've got management capacity, they've got labor, they've got infrastructure, and they have know-how that dates back, a tradition that dates back 60, 70 years. So they have the expertise to be a force for good, and we need to use that. Government is antithetical to the private sector, whatever words are used. The fact is that Sri Lankan governments historically have been suspicious of non-government actors. This is part of our colonial heritage, when we had a them and us kind of mentality. But when our founding fathers, for example, devised the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance in 1937, they had explicit provision for getting non-government actors involved in that enterprise of protecting nature, of protecting biodiversity. Provision was made to have honorary directors of wildlife conservation. These provisions we don't use anymore, but were we to have similar provisions in the management authority that's coming up, it would hugely empower the authority. Just imagine if the provisions of the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance were put into effect. What a transformation you could have. For example, living on the borders of Yala National Park is Dr. Prithviraj Fernando, one of the world's most foremost conservation biologists. Just imagine if he were involved in the management of that park. Minneria National Park has living on its boundary Dr. Sumit Pilupitiya, the national elephant expert. Yet he is not integrated into the management of the park. The law specifically provides for people like that to be integrated into management. So I ask you not to lose the opportunity in this case, of not integrating the RPCs into the management of the upper watersheds. Hugely important. Number 4. The rivers of Sri Lanka, the 103 river basins, pretty much all have their origins, as we hear time and time again, in the upper watersheds. What is also important is to realize that they are roadways, they are highways hydrological highways that connect the highlands to the lowlands. Every river and stream in Sri Lanka, by law, has a reservation on either side of it. And these reservations can be used to provide biodiversity connectivity, vegetative connectivity between the lowlands and the highlands, forming highways for biodiversity that connect up our fragmented ecosystems, our fragmented forests. A huge opportunity awaits us. The fifth point I want to make is less optimistic, and that is that we spend a lot of time and money planting trees in Sri Lanka, hoping that things will get better. In the highlands, this is largely a waste of time. Landscapes like this are very unlikely ever to be forested again for centuries. And investing in reforesting those landscapes is probably a waste of investment. This is Udaveria Estate, I think about 700 hectares on the borders of Houghton Plains National Park. It is now a wasteland, but so it must remain. Many of us have tried, me included, with huge investment of time and money. This is me in 1998 at a new site near Agrapatana, elevation of about 5,000 feet, trying to restore montane forest on this wasteland of abandoned tea. Huge investment, nurseried tens of thousands of native species, planted them out. But within just a decade, they were overtaken by alien invasive species. The entire landscape is now composed of alien invasive species. In the highlands, we have dozens of very aggressive alien species that take over and dominate the landscape. This light green area you see in this slide on Houghton Plains is a consequence. It's a fire scar left from a forest fire that took place in 1987. Now, 40 years later, it has only one species growing on it, a Central American shrub known as Ostro-eupatorium. You can't really shake that off. So we need to realize that restoring native vegetation in the highlands is a massive problem. Finally, two little lessons from my own time as serving in government. Statistically, both the Management Authority for the Upper Watersheds and the Canopy Fund will fail. They will fail because the vast majority of government funds and authorities have failed already. We have an opportunity before us to make them work. But to make them work, we have to learn from the lessons from the ones who have failed. Most of the funds that have been set up, whether for tourism development, tea promotion, have failed because there are no agreed key performance indicators built into the fund. They fail because when there's enough money in the kitty to be tempting to the treasury grabs the money. The government interferes in the really big funds like the EPF. We saw that happening in the last few years after the economic crisis, where the EPF became, the Employees Provident Fund became the biggest victim of the financial crisis. And also the Auditor General of Sri Lanka insists that such funds must carry zero investment risk. Now, when you combine all those together, you see you can't have a practical fund, because every fund carries some investment risk. There will be years when you underperform, years when you overperform. But the Auditor General insists that you be punished for underperforming. And nobody is willing to take a risk in those conditions, as a result of which these funds tend to fail. I managed the Tea Promotion Fund for 2.5 years. That fund generates about 800 million rupees a year in government revenue, and it's meant to promote Sri Lankan tea. But when you really think of the performance indicators that would be attached to that, you find that it's a really big challenge. Because what are the performance indicators? You have to sell more tea, but you really can't do that because Sri Lanka produces only so much tea and every ounce of that tea gets sold. So you can't really change the amount of tea that Sri Lanka sells as a result of promoting it. You got to change the value of the tea, but you can't really do that either, because the tea is all sold at a public auction very transparently, and the auction determines the price. Promoting it doesn't help. So what are you left with? You're left with promoting the national brand of Ceylon tea. But we don't own that brand. We have been legislated and prohibited from owning that brand. Now the word Ceylon can be used by anyone in the world, because in 1972, the government enacted a constitution that expunged the word Ceylon from the lexicon. We even persuaded the government of Britain to pass an act of parliament in Westminster to get rid of the word Ceylon from the English language. And now nobody owns the word except for one little town in Ontario, Canada, which calls itself Ceylon, population 96. So tea promotion basically cannot work. What is the end result? The fund keeps accumulating, and every now and then the Treasury helps itself to some money. The tea board itself is running itself, it's using the fund for its operating costs, not for tea promotion. So you have a problem. Same with tourism. What do we expect from tourism promotion? Do we expect more tourists to come to Sri Lanka? Do we expect tourists to stay longer in Sri Lanka? Or do we expect them to spend more money in Sri Lanka? If you think about it, those three objectives are mutually antithetical. You can't have them all. But how do you decide what those performance indicators should be? Think also carefully about the idea of an authority. We already have 27 authorities in Sri Lanka. Most of them, except for rare exceptions like the Ports Authority, are failures. The Child Protection Authority, absolutely useless. The Consumer Affairs Authority, totally incompetent. They go after little shopkeepers. I'm sorry, I'm being very outspoken because, after all, I'm a private citizen. What can you do? They go after little shopkeepers, but the big rice cartels, for example, manipulate and manage the pricing. The Urban Development Authority, probably the worst offender. They are the custodians of trillions of rupees worth of land. But on their balance sheet, they show their land value is 160 billion rupees. 160 billion rupees, some simple arithmetic will show you, is about the value of Vihar Mahadevi Park. But the UDA owns vast expanses of urban land all across the country, worth trillions. And even on that 160 billion rupees, their annual return they show is just 2%. So these authorities are abject failures. And we must learn from the mistakes we've made with them in designing the authority that will manage the upper watersheds. The other thing is, when you design this authority, you're going to do so on the basis of the legal draftsman's making a bill of parliament. Just 2 weeks ago, the legal draftsman released the Animal Welfare Bill. This was gazetted by the government. I published in yesterday's newspaper an article which explains why this bill makes absolutely no sense. An unintended consequence of the Animal Protection Bill, or the Welfare Bill, is that it altogether prohibits fisheries. It puts 250,000 Sri Lankan fishermen out of work. It entirely prohibits the poultry industry. Laws like this are not unusual in Sri Lanka. The Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, because I work in the biodiversity field, when it was revised in 2009, it unintentionally prohibited the import of pretty much any meat product or fish product. So the law is ignored simply because it was badly drafted. In that same law, there is one place in which it defines what a freshwater fish is, a tropical on the left. A tropical aquarium fish means any species of fish listed in Schedule 4. When you go to Schedule 4 on the right, you see it's a list of birds. So when we have this level of incompetence in legal drafting, and you are doing something like you are setting to do now, which is to draft a bill of parliament to establish the Upper Watershed Authority, to establish the Canopy Fund, you need to be very crafty with how you do your legal drafting to maximize its value to the country. And my final message to you in making these innovations is not to think that you're inventing this for the first time. Countries like Costa Rica have been there before. They've been there a half century before us with payments for ecosystems. And they've made it work very successfully. They've doubled the area under forest cover in a generation. They've got an ecosystem payment system that really does work. They make it work by having moderate taxes on fossil fuels, on the use of water for hydropower and even for irrigation, and by attracting worldwide funds and donations, because the project is a success. People always will support a success. And as a result of that, they've developed an ecotourism sector that now gets 2.5 million nature tourists coming to Costa Rica every year, paying substantially more than tourists pay in Sri Lanka. So how can Sri Lanka fund this enterprise that we're thinking about today? I think payments for ecosystem services is something we can easily manage within our existing financial structure. It's great that the ADB is involved, but the ADB I see more as a facilitator than actually a funder for this. Because if you look at on the left-hand side column there, the annual cost of importing fossil fuel, the CEB's revenue just from hydropower alone, 600 million rupees a year, and the National Water Supply and Drainage Board. These all depend on ecosystem services provided by the upper watersheds. And a very small tax of 1% is what I've shown on the right-hand side. If you look at the right-hand side column, it adds up to 23 billion rupees a year. We don't need that much money. With just 9 billion rupees a year, you can hire 10,000 people. You can lift them out of poverty, politically attractive, while paying them 75,000 rupees a month. We can transform the upper watersheds that have suffered 150 years of abuse. When you look at the insult to the landscape on the left, at the time the highlands were opened up, and compare them with photographs of Nagasaki in 1945, they look bizarrely similar. And this has gone on year after year after year for 150 years until we have arrived at our present day. And now you have before you an opportunity to set right that wrong, to bring stability to future generations, to restore the ecology of Sri Lanka's most valuable real estate. I ask you to do that thoughtfully and carefully, and not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rohan. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of thought fodder there to discuss as we move along. Our next topic is investing in upper watersheds, the hydrological and economic case for action. I'd like to invite to make the presentation of the findings from the ADB and supported studies on hydrological assessment of Sri Lanka's central and upper watershed area, the Deputy Country Manager of IMI, Dr. Nishadi Eriyagama.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Sanat, Sumit, and others for giving us this opportunity to present our work. I know following Dr. Pethiaguda is a real hard act, but let me give it a try. So I'll move straight into the presentation. Yeah, okay. So this was a study that we undertook as part of this ADB's Upper Watershed Ecological Restoration Program to identify optimal watershed management interventions which could reduce erosion and enhance the resilience of upper watersheds in Sri Lanka. So the study was carried out in 2 phases. Phase 1 was a rapid assessment, where we looked at the entire upper Mahaveli watershed, that is the upper part of the the Mahaweli River in Sri Lanka, the longest river, the area that's shown on this map. And this phase 1 in the rapid assessment, what we basically did was to identify erosion risk hotspots and also areas vulnerable to other hazards, for example, floods, droughts, and landslides, and even deforestation. So we combined this vulnerability and developed a combined vulnerability index and ranked the subbasins within the Upper Mahaweli watershed according to this vulnerability. And the idea behind this ranking is to identify a priority subbasin or a priority area for a detailed assessment as part of phase 2. And the detailed assessment, a detailed eco-hydrological assessment, what we tried to do is to establish baseline conditions with regard to hydrology, sediment, ecosystem services, and water quality, and also simulate changes in these baseline conditions due to projected climate change, future climate change scenarios. And the final objective is to identify optimal watershed management interventions, which could reduce erosion and enhance overall sustainability of this selected particular watershed, and which could also be linked to an MRV or monitoring, reporting, and verification system. So as part of phase 1, the area that came out as the highest vulnerable is this immediate watershed of the Rantai Bay Reservoir, which is colored in dark brown here. Now, because the Rantai Bay Reservoir, the Umao is draining into the Rantai Bay Reservoir, we selected this immediate watershed of the Rantai Bay Reservoir and its upstream areas for this a detailed eco-hydrological study in phase 2. So Umaoya Basin, this is shown in the map here, outlined in black. It's about 729 kilometers altogether in extent, and has quite a range in altitude from 240 meters in the northern end to 2,500 meters in the southern end above mean sea level. And the land use is mixed. So there's natural forest, vegetable cultivation, tea, paddy lands, and also settlements. Okay, so this is basically within this Umaoya catchment, this is what we are doing. 1, 2, 3 is establishing the baseline conditions with regard to hydrology and sediments, ecosystem services, and water quality. And we have completed these 3 steps now, 1, 2, 3. Next is simulating changes in the baseline conditions due to future climate scenarios, which will lead to the identification of optimal management interventions, considering both current climate conditions as well as future climate conditions. So we have completed steps 1, 2, 3 and are working on 4, 5, and 6, and would like to present some results from these first 3 steps. Okay, so to establish the baseline hydrologic conditions, we have used the soil and water assessment tool model, basically a hydrological model, SWOT model for short. And you can see how we have envisioned the whole basin or configured the basin in this model by dividing the whole basin into 38 smaller subbasins and 86 landscape units, which all the hydrological processes are being mathematically modeled inside the inside the SWOT model. And basically the inputs that are used are climate data, topographic data, land use and soil types. And to calibrate and validate the model, we have used measured stream flow as well as measured reservoir data, outflows and inflows, etc. So just to give you how we are establishing the baseline of the hydrological conditions, some summary results. So if you look at the annual average discharge at the end of the basin, at the end of the furthest outlet to the Rantambe reservoir, it's like the annual flow is around 514.5 million cubic meters. And during the period that we considered from 1990 to 2024, the highest annual has been in 2011, and the lowest annual has been in 1998. And on the right is the monthly average distribution, how the river flow varies during the year for each month. And as you can see, the highest flow generally occurs in December, and this is the northeast monsoon period, where most of the high erosive events also occur in these upper parts of the watershed. And the dry season is basically June, July, August. So during the period that we consider, the lowest average annual flow has been in July. Then, so in establishing baseline ecosystem service conditions, what we looked at is focusing on the main ecosystem services, that's supply of water as well as regulating water quality. Focusing on these two, we tried to establish how these two ecosystem services are being impacted by erosion and sedimentation. So this is just to illustrate what the processes that we are looking at. And for this, we use the INVEST model, the INVEST sediment delivery ratio model, which basically estimates how much hill slope eroded soil is likely to reach the stream network. So just to illustrate how the processes work, on the left, you can see that it's basically bare land. The flow path is very straightforward and short, and it's a steep slope, and there's sparse vegetation. So there's there's higher chance for sediments to reach the stream from a landscape like this, and there's not much deposition. So most of the sediments come straight into the river. But if you look at the right side, here there's vegetation on the ground, and the flow paths are not that straightforward. They are winding, and there's the slope is gentler. So areas like this, the chance of sediments ending up in the stream is lower. So just to illustrate the processes that are modeled in this model, in the INVEST model in simple terms, and on the right side, in landscapes like this, there's higher deposition of dislocated material. So some results from our application of the INVEST model. So the graph on the left shows the percentage of sediment contribution by land use type within this basin into the river network. And here the highest contribution is from agricultural lands, and agricultural lands refers to tea lands as well as vegetable cultivations, etc. But this is, if you consider the total contribution from the whole catchment area. But if you look at the per hectare contribution, you would see that we haven't shown it here, but you would see that the highest contributions come from areas which are subjected to landslides and also bare lands, etc. Just to note that this is the total contribution, and these are also preliminary estimates, I must say. So we are trying to refine these estimates as well. And on the right, on the map, this shows areas, the potential for soil erosion within this particular catchment. The red means higher potential for erosion. Green means lower potential for erosion. So this area in the middle of the basin between Välimädö and Nuorelia has come out as the area having the highest potential for erosion within the Umaoe catchment. Okay, so we talked about hydrology, ecosystem services, sediments, and we also did a water quality sampling. We did 2 rounds of water quality sampling, both in the dry season, because we didn't come across a real wet season during the study period. And we did the sampling in 21 locations from upstream to downstream at both disturbed and undisturbed landscapes. And we tested for a number of physicochemical parameters as well as pesticides. Then, so these are some of the results from this water quality analysis. The map on the left shows the water quality index, which is a numerical index that represents the overall quality of the water. The size of the circles represents the value of the water quality index. And if the water quality index is less than 50, it is considered safe for drinking, but higher than 50 is considered unsafe for drinking. This is with regard to drinking water standards. Now, so we found that at 13 locations, this water quality index was greater than 50, which means it's not suitable for drinking. And the reason for this is mainly the presence of aluminium and iron. However, most parameters were within the WHO and SLS guidelines, except for aluminium and iron. So this is one of the observations that we have made. And in general, the water quality index is high in the middle part of the basin. Then we also looked at the presence of pesticides, the map on the right. Again, here what it shows is the number of pesticides that were detected, number of types or varieties of pesticides. Again, in the middle of the basin, the larger circles, there a higher number of pesticides have been detected. For example, at 6 locations, we found that more than 5 pesticides were present at these locations, which is expected because there's heavy agricultural cultivations happening in this area. So this is just some summary results from the water quality assessment. Then to help with our I'm sorry, some of the images are not coming on. I'm not sure why, but it's okay. So just to help with our modeling and also the design of interventions, we undertook a number of field trips and also did a number of stakeholder consultations. So these are some of the observations that we made. So there are some well-managed lands which do not actually discharge a lot of sediments into the waterways, and the water, for example, in this first photograph, is really clear. There's not much sediments in the water. So in these well-managed areas. But the two images on the right are not so well managed. And these are the sort of areas which give rise to erosion and dislocation of large quantities of sediments. Okay, the images are there. And then we had the stakeholder consultations. This shows two of them, one with the Natural Resources Management Center of the Department of Agriculture and another with the University of Peradeniya, for us to get feedback on our work and also to support us in the modeling as well as designing interventions. Okay, so just a summary of what we have been doing, and the next steps will be to identify what changes will occur to these baseline conditions due to potential climate change. And the final step would be how can you address this erosion and sedimentation? What are the most optimal ways to do this? And could be changes in land use, changes in management practices. So this is the final step of the work, and we are working on this at the moment. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much to Dr. Iriyagama. Joining us online, virtually, to speak on the valuation of water and ecosystem services and their contribution to the economy is the Chief Executive of Watermark Limited in the UK, Dr. Alex Money.
Well, good morning, everyone from Oxford. I hope you can all hear me. As I understand, my slides will be shared from over there. So if it's possible to put the slides up, that would be great. Thank you. And could we, yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. Yep, so thank you. My name is Alex Money. I'm the CEO of Watermark, and my job here is to briefly talk you through some work that is ongoing that ADB has asked us to do around valuing water through an innovative approach known as shadow pricing. Next slide, please. So in terms of context, well, I think the challenge has been well described in terms of the watershed. So I'll spare you my going through that. In a sense, this presentation follows very directly on from what Imi has just presented in terms of identifying the area of focus, the Umoya and Rantambe Reservoir. Maybe the one thing to highlight on, maybe the one thing to highlight on this slide is, so our interest in this work is really thinking about downstream beneficiaries, I guess, from these ecosystem services. And so those who stand to benefit from improvements and preservation and restoration of ecosystem services, and conversely, those who are also vulnerable to further deterioration, economically vulnerable, and so may have reason to want to support, the effective management of these services. Thank you. Next slide, please. So yes, just maybe to put the focus of the study into some context. So from left to right on these boxes, we're thinking about the direction from upstream to downstream. Our interest is particularly around thinking about the multipurpose development project, the hydro facility that is fed from the Rantambe Reservoir, and then from there further on to the grid. I was very glad to hear in Rohan's presentation, excellent presentation, to start making this distinction between landslides, which are natural to the landscape, of course, of Sri Lanka, vis-a-vis erosion, which is more anthropogenic. And there has been some very good research from academics in Sri Lanka, just pointing out that the rates of erosion in this region are circa 100 times what you would expect from natural background erosion due to some of the anthropogenic activity. And similarly, there's been some very good research that talk about the benefit or the contribution that sustainable land management interventions can make in terms of reducing sediment wash load, and the range is somewhere between 3 to 5. So yes, and then the final point there, just confirming that the focus area is aligned with the work that IMI has been doing in phase 1 and phase 2. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about how we're approaching this work in terms of valuing water and the application of shadow pricing, which I'll describe in a second, to inform the design and implementation of a payment for ecosystem services mechanism. I should just say that this work on shadow pricing for water is part of a broader piece of work that the ADB is interested in thinking about how value reflective approaches can be incorporated into the bank's processes, lending, engagement with client governments and so forth. So one use case, which is what I'm focusing on here, is on payment for ecosystem services, but shadow water pricing has multiple applications, including around policy and regulation, working and engaging the private sector, and then thinking more broadly about water security and basin resilience. So this is just to situate this work in a broader piece of engagement with the ADB across the region. Next slide, please. So there are basically 3 concepts that I want to talk very briefly about in this presentation. This idea of valuing water is really just understanding that, which we all do, of course, understand that water is a natural capital asset. A lot of the value that flows from it as an asset are not priced by the markets. Markets tend to price the cost of abstraction and the cost of distribution and treatment, but other benefits and other ecosystem services and benefits are not routinely captured in standard frameworks, and that is the rationale for using shadow pricing. So shadow pricing is an attempt to support value discovery through price discovery, and it captures, in this context, what consumers might rationally pay for services that are generated from preserving the resource and making it available. And then in payment for ecosystem services, again, I think this has been quite well described. The only point I want to highlight here is this point on conditionality. So conditionality is key to payment for ecosystem services functioning. That is to say, payments have to be conditional on a verified delivery, and if that doesn't happen, the behavioral change doesn't take place. And this goes very closely to the remarks being made earlier on MRV, on monitoring, reporting, and verification. Thank you. Next slide, please. So maybe we can just get into it a little bit more here. So just the logic chain of how we're approaching this and how we're thinking about the work. We start by thinking about the watershed, which is the natural capital asset, and from that asset, services are derived, which are a function again of flow, quality, retention of sediment, and so forth. Those services can be valued in lots of. I mean, the literature on valuing water and the environmental economics literature is very broad and very diffuse. We're looking very specifically here in this study at the economic value of the services that are being derived as the basis for the work and the analysis, recognizing, of course, there are other dimensions of value that go beyond that. And from that economic value, to think about how a payment for ecosystem services modality might be structured, and then, of course, ultimately to think about the conservation outcome. But just in shorthand, there are essentially 2 things that we're really interested in supporting with here. So the upstream question is really, at its heart, quite a simple question. at what is the minimum payment at which it's worth my while to adopt sustainable land management? And that minimum payment will vary depending on who is being paid, where, and for what service or what intervention or what behavioral outcome. So there's lots of things within that. And then the downstream question is, what is the maximum I would rationally pay to protect the watershed services on which my asset depends? And again, there are many downstream beneficiaries if you think about tourism and so forth. For the study focus here, we've thought very specifically about the multipurpose development project and the hydro facility. But again, we could, in principle and in practice, could think about both the upstream and downstream stakeholders as being much broader than what we're focusing on in this first study. Thank you. Next slide, please. I was very glad, and thank you very much, Rohan, for highlighting the fact that we're not alone in thinking about this work. This FONAFIFO program in Costa Rica, which you saw a couple of slides on, is actually an excellent program to understand, not least because it's been running for quite a long time. There's 20 years now of very good empirical, academic, and other evidence that's been gathered. It's a large program which involves a lot of participants, as you saw earlier. I just wanted to highlight from my perspective some of the attributes of this program, this FONAFIFO program, that I think are relevant for how we think about the project here. The government was the buyer of not just the last resort, but actually as the first resort in many cases in the early years. So that gave the scheme some stability before relying on private co-financing, and the government was a very stable partner in making sure that the scheme was rooted and anchored early on. FONAFIFO, which is I suppose the analog to Canopy in the Costa Rica case, was essentially an independently operated intermediary, and this independence was seen to be quite critical to managing the transaction process and crucially maintaining and building trust between the different parties involved in a PES transaction. The other thing that came out of the work, particularly when looking back at the data, is how important it was to have monitoring, reporting, and verification embedded right at the start. And just to reinforce that point, that conditionality is what drives, conditional payments are what drive behavior change, and conditionality itself is only as strong as the verification process. The other interesting thing, which we haven't done much work on so far, honestly, was to see that as this Costa Rican program evolved, they began to think much more beyond the direct tourism and tourism-related income flows, thinking about other co-benefits that this program could and was generating around biodiversity credits, carbon credits, broader value of amenities, etc. And they've actually taken quite a progressive approach to thinking about how that could broaden and diversify the source of funding that could come into the scheme, increase resilience, reduce the dependence on donors, and so forth. And so there are things within Costa Rica's program that I think are useful for us to be thinking about in this conversation more broadly. So thank you, Rohan, for bringing that up for me. Next slide, please. So maybe just to put this into context, there's essentially two things that we're doing here. The first thing is understanding what the value of the water services from the catchment into the reservoir are worth to downstream users. So, what is the value of this water, which is essentially, I'll talk a bit more about that in a second, but that's the kind of the first stage. And then the second stage is that once you have an understanding of what the water is worth, what are the rational ways to spend money on sustainable land management practice, given the downstream value at stake, but then also obviously understanding what type of interventions are likely to lead to optimized outcomes in terms of sustainable land management, and crucially recognizing interventions that won't lead to those outcomes. And I think, again, Rohan's slide about afforestation, for example, is a salutary kind of way to think about these things. And then in terms of the detail, I'll say a couple of things about this in the next couple of slides. Thank you. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking, so I just want you to think for a second about the downstream beneficiary here, and let's just think about the NPDP as our unit of focus. The way we apply these valuing approaches, we use a multi-method approach, and the reason for that is to socialize a broader set of data and cross-reference and calibrate the outputs that come from it. But essentially, there are four valuation methods that are relevant in this particular context. The first relates to understanding the relationship between the condition of the watershed and the hydropower output. So how much does it matter to the hydropower operator, the quality of the water and the volume of the water, etc., that's coming, and the level of siltation that's coming to the reservoir. So that's kind of that's block one. Block two is trying to understand the replacement costs. So in the event that you didn't do the sustainable land management practice or the ecosystem services, what would it cost? What are the alternative ways in which you might deliver the same water services? So these might be to do with dredging the reservoir, doing other things to treat the water. These are the hydro plant works on a contract for difference, so it's committed to delivering power supply. If it wasn't able to get it from hydro, they'd have to look at alternative sources of generation. What are the costs of that? Which are invariably higher, to say nothing of potential higher emissions as well. So that's the idea around the replacement cost. The avoided cost function is really thinking about, well, what ends up happening if the flows into the reservoir are lower and there's siltation. So that at the very least would likely lead to lower generation, which is essentially foregone revenue. So that's a cost that's generated. Maintaining the asset would have higher operating and maintenance costs. And then actually we look quite a lot at the asset itself. So these are large fixed capital assets which depreciate over time. Increased sedimentation of the reservoir may accelerate the impairment of that asset, which writes down its value faster. So that's another component of the valuation. And then the benefit transfer is essentially looking at comparable watershed assessments. So again, the data from Costa Rica is helpful, but there are other ways for us to cross-calibrate and understand whether we're within to understand the confidence interval, I suppose, between these different valuation methods. So that's the kind of four ways in which we go about this work. Next slide, please. And so how does it all come together in terms of sort of financializing this? So I've just described these valuation methods around revenue loss, cost increases, and asset impairment, and that generates a financial value, and we can from that financial value, taking the time of the asset life, etc., derive a net present value, and this net present value is essentially what the shadow price is. It's giving a sense of the value per unit of water to the beneficiary downstream. So the key metric, I guess, and again, Rohan raised this idea of KPIs, which is great. The key metric, in a sense, is the benefit to cost ratio. So the shadow price, which is a proxy for the value of the water to the beneficiary, divided by the cost of that land management intervention, gives you the ratio that is the benefit to cost ratio. And obviously you want that number to be above 1 wherever possible. So I need to move on. So next slide, please. I won't speak at length about this slide, but this is essentially just laying out the sort of framework when thinking about the mechanism. Some of the key stakeholders here that are going to be relevant to how how this program will be operationalized. Next slide, please. Maybe I won't dwell too far on this. So we've done a preliminary report which sets out the rationale, logic, and preliminary evidential base for taking this approach. This needs to be calibrated by actual field on the ground data, which is the focus for the coming months, and then we hope to submit to ADB a sort of final report which does all the quantification of this work for them to incorporate into this process. So let me stop there, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Mani, who will remain with us for a short Q&A. I would like to invite Dr. Nishadi Eriagam also to join me here, and Dr. Alex will join us virtually. Nishadi, thank you very much for a very enlightening set of findings. And I just wanted to ask you, how well does Sri Lanka's water resources management and the land use policies align with what you have found out in the hydrological data that we have that is actually showing? How well does it align with it, and what are the biggest gaps there are?
I think as far as policies go, we do have enough and more to cover the management of water resources and as well as the upper watersheds. But I think there is a lack of coordination between different agencies, and also a lack of enforcement or implementation of these policies and regulations. So I think that's where the biggest gap is. This is even if we set up this authority on upper watersheds, if we don't really up our game on this enforcement and implementation of regulations, I don't think we would be heading anywhere. So this is, I think, something that we need to really think hard about.
Thank you. Dr. Mani, I know it's very early in the morning for you, 6 o'clock, probably 6:30. So yes, I saw you having your caffeine shot just now. What practical first steps would you recommend for a country like ours to start integrating water ecosystem valuation into the national economic planning policy and also into corporate decision making?
Yes, thanks for the question. It's not that early actually. I have children and a dog, so 6 a.m. is a normal time of the day. Well, look, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is really to recognize, as was presented earlier, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are very good examples of schemes such as this being implemented at scale, and there's quite a lot of data that's been gathered around that. I think it's very helpful in much the same way that IMI did a baseline exercise on the watersheds to inform the analysis. I think it would be a helpful baseline exercise as well, just to become familiar with how some of these schemes have worked historically. What are the key success factors? What are the key risk factors? And understanding that to start with. And I think from there's a very natural, logical flow chain about understanding which are the key stakeholders that need to be engaged with, brought into the process. The financing and the financial modalities, ADB has obviously got vast experience in this, but again, this is an area where the knowledge is there. So it's really starting by recognizing what we don't need to discover, what already has been well understood, and just ensuring that is adapted to reflect the context and unique circumstances of Sri Lanka. Thanks.
Dr. Nishadi, what are the most significant changes that your assessment actually revealed in the hydrological behavior of our central and upper watersheds?
So what we have been trying to do is to establish the current baseline and how things are at the moment. So what we will be doing next is actually how things are likely to change with climate change in the future. So, so there we will see the key changes that are likely to happen if the climate change materializes. And these are all, something that we need to bear in mind is that these are all projected climate scenarios, hypothetical pathways. So that's one thing. So we might see a few some key changes in the baseline hydrologic conditions, the baseline sediment conditions, etc., with if we use these climate change scenarios. And another thing that I would like to point out is some of this, the data that we use to establish the baseline predates Cyclone Ditwa. Cyclone Ditwa actually brought about large changes to the upper watersheds of the country. And we are trying as much as possible to capture these changes because of Cyclone Ditwa. For example, by incorporating the areas where landslides occurred into our land use maps, etc. So this is also some really big changes that have happened in the upper watersheds due to the cyclone, and we are trying to capture that. And the other biggest change that has occurred, I guess, is deforestation, shrinking of the forest area particularly in the basin that we are currently studying. Yeah.
So there's a question for you. Why has a significant Uma Oya multipurpose development project not been considered in establishing the baseline data? Has the potential impact of this diversion on sediment load and sediment transport been assessed?
So the question is, why is Uma Oya not being considered?
In establishing the baseline data.
So what I'll do is I'll maybe hand over to Tilina, who is our modeling expert, who actually did the SWOT modeling work for us, who would be in a better position to answer this question than myself.
Can you repeat the question?
Why has a significant Uma Oya multipurpose development project not been considered in establishing baseline data? Has the potential impact of this diversion on sediment load and sediment transport been assessed?
Yeah. Actually, when this Uma Oya project is ongoing from 2007 to up until 2022, this issue was always in the discussion, but there were some actions also taken, but up to date, there's no any, I mean, sediment data is available, but other data such as stream flow data and rainfall data and things like that are available. But in anywhere in Sri Lanka, this sediment data is not available. There are some small studies has been conducted in some small patches, but some really comprehensive database is not available. So in addition to that, I will add one point. One of the questions you raised with Dr. Nishadi. When we consider the upstream land use pattern and the land cover pattern. Before this study also, I also in some idea about that this forest plantation and the seasonal crop cultivation are the main factors leading for this soil erosion. But when we consider the upstream homesteads also, these homesteads also they are mainly using for this seasonal crop cultivation. In those places also some heavy soil erosion is happening, which is not like that seasonal crop cultivation areas, but closer to that there are some high soil erosion is happening in this particular catchment. But when it comes to the lowermost areas, that behavior is changing. That is also one of the important point we have identified. Also, in some of the forest plantation, especially in places like Valimada and Nohi areas, now the forest department has, keeping these forests as conservative forest. So now these forest areas are gradually becoming to this natural forest land, which is really healthy for this soil erosion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just in conclusion, both of you, very briefly, looking ahead, what would success look like in 5 years' time in terms of Sri Lanka's watersheds and the way Sri Lanka values and manages water as an economic asset?
So I would like to point out the last slide that I showed in my presentation. So there are actually some well-managed lands in the upper watersheds, as opposed to not so well-managed lands. So if the right incentive is there, managing the lands well is not impossible. So to me, I think success would look like if all the lands in the upper watersheds are managed in this beautiful way, where the erosion is minimized and sedimentation is minimized.
Thank you, Dr. Regaman. Dr. Mani, same question to you. What would success look like in 5 years' time?
Well, I think success in 5 years will be a sustainable, functioning payment for ecosystem services scheme, which is well regulated, which has good beneficiary income flows and so forth. I think it's entirely possible. I think particularly given the economic significance of these watersheds in Sri Lanka, the scene is well set for this to work, and I very much hope that it does. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mani. Thank you, Dr. Regaman.
Thank you very much.
And so while the chairs are being brought up for our panel discussion, which is on the theme From Natural Capital to Investment, Financing Sri Lanka's Upper Watershed Restoration, may I request our keynote speaker, Rohan Pethiyagoda, who is also going to be on the panel, to join our facilitator, Sanath Ranavana. So our panelists today, independent consultant, Mr. Abhijit Baumik, Senior Natural Resources and Agriculture Specialist from ADB, Sumit Pokhrel, Senior Additional Secretary to the President, Finance and Economic Affairs, Secretary Acting, Ministry of Energy, Mr. Russell Laponso, Deputy Director, Department of External Resources, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Ms. Shashini Vitana, Country Economist from the UNDP, Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara, Managing Director of Haley's Plantations, Dr. Roshan Rajadore, and Chairman of Plant and past President of the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, Mr. Sri De Silva Vijayaratna. I will now hand over to your moderator, Mr. Sanath Ranavana.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. So here we have, we're starting a panel discussion after listening to some very inspiring and also provocative keynote speech from our honorary expert, Dr. Rohan Petiagoda, and also some very good technical presentations on the certain technical aspects of how to assess the impact of this upper watershed area on downstream beneficiaries. Now, these presentations have come at a cost. We are half an hour behind schedule. So I've been tasked now with this impossible task of facilitating a discussion among 6 panelists and this presentation within an hour, which is what I'm going to try and do. Now, to begin with, let me first ask our Mr. Abhijit Bhaumik to make a short presentation about the benefits of experiences, international experiences in blended financing. Just to briefly introduce to you Mr. Abhijit, as you go up to the podium. So Mr. Abhijit is an independent structured finance consultant with over 30 years of experience in the area of financial advisory and infrastructure projects. And over the last decade, he has worked extensively with several multilateral development banks, including the ADB, and in several countries in South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. And his work in these countries has mostly been in supporting government entities to develop and structure climate and nature financing facilities. Abhijit, over to you.
Thank you, Sanath. So how many minutes again do I have?
If you could keep it to under 10, that would be great.
Okay, great. 20 slides, 10 minutes. Here we go. Okay, what I want to really cover is, I think in the morning, the presentations that we went through, it was clear what the need for protecting the upper watersheds are. It was also clear that financing, this kind of engagement on a sustainable basis significantly would require some innovative thinking on financing. What I'm really planning to present are examples in countries of similar financing that have actually happened, some of the challenges thereof, and what we could possibly learn from those, and that then helps us design whatever financial structure we are actually looking at. So let me move on. So some of the key market challenges for innovative financing, particularly for financing nature, and I'll just talk about 2 or 3. One is, I think the ecosystem services are highly undervalued by traditional financing models. Traditional financing has not looked at ecosystem as hasn't given it an economic value, and therefore there aren't financing models, commercially that have actually been structured. Second, and consequently, really, therefore, the risk mitigation tools for financing nature and financing ecosystem are very poorly developed or are very inadequate. Thirdly, this industry has very high upfront costs, whereas the benefits of ecosystem are really over a very long term. So it isn't, fund something today and you see the benefits over the next couple of years. It'll probably take 10 years, 15 years sometimes to see the benefits. And traditional financing markets are not designed to finance projects or services of that nature. Finally, what has been happening historically is that the public and the government has largely been financing, and it's very clear to all of us who work in countries like Sri Lanka that public money available for this is limited. And increasingly, we have to look at how do we leverage private sector or non-public money to come into this sector to actually co-finance along with the government. So public's not going to disappear. That unfortunately is not going to happen. And therefore, it's really going to be how do you leverage public finance to attract institutional, commercial, impact investment, and all of those kind of money into the sector. And in that aspect, there have been some development on some innovative financial instruments. The first being concessional loans or concessional funds, and that's not very innovative. It's grants and low-cost money, but it is something that is actually low-cost loans. It is something that is there and coming into the sector. But if you look at the others that I have on the slide, the next one, the outcome-based finance, that is something that's increasingly gaining, particularly in the carbon markets and in nature finance, where once you deliver an outcome, you kind of get financing from it. And that's been quite prevalent, and you're seeing a lot of that. The third, which is really the market-based instruments, and this is really what is interesting, and we've had a lot of discussion on payment for ecosystem services. That probably is one of the most increasingly prevalent mechanisms for financing nature. Blended finance, which was the next one, is really bringing in different kinds of money into a same financing mechanism, is again getting very critical. And we look at a couple of examples there. Debt swaps happening in Central America, some of the obvious examples. May or may not be very relevant for Sri Lanka at this stage, so I'm going to maybe not talk about those examples. But finally, the conservation funds and facilities, which are really platforms that you create. And we talked about the Costa Rica fund, but there is the Brazil Amazon fund that I would talk about, and a green finance facility in China as a case study that I'll talk about. So the three that I will have examples and talk about would be the market-based finances, blended finance, and platforms, financing platforms. Costa Rica, I think we've heard enough of, and I'm going to skip this slide. But that said, you have closer home an example of a similar situation in Vietnam, which has a little, it's like a payment for forest environment services. So it's PFES. And here, the platform actually gets in PES from water supply companies, from hydropower plants, and tourism companies. So they contribute a certain percentage of their revenue because they're beneficiaries for the afforestation that is actually happening in there, and that revenue comes into this platform. This platform is then used to incentivize forest owners, communities, households, and organizations that help protect and restore forests, and of course for forest management. But interestingly, what Vietnam has done is also routing all of its other climate finance or climate money that comes into the country. So for instance, the forest carbon credits that came in from GCF, which was about $70 million, also came into this platform. The carbon credits that came in from the World Bank facility there also came into this platform. So it's pooling in all sorts of climate and nature money that's coming into the country, into this platform, and using it to actually drive forest environmental services. Maldives, this was a tourism tax. Anyone who goes and stays in a hotel in Maldives pays about $6 a night as a tourism tax. That goes into the Maldives Green Fund. And this Green Fund, managed by the Ministry of Environment there, actually goes into renewable energy, solid waste management, and so on and so forth in terms of financing the viability gap of these projects. So ADB, for instance, is financed a waste-to-energy project in Maldives, and the gap in the O&M, the operations and maintenance cost of that, is being financed by this green fund there, and then keeps it sustainable. So again, interesting mechanisms given the country that you're in to look at who the beneficiaries are and how can you tap into resources from that beneficiaries to then go back into nature projects. Let me move on to the blended finance examples. So there was a fund that was created in 2020, which is the Agri-3 Fund. This was created by the United Nations Environment Program along with Rabobank, and then there are a couple of other partners in there. This was largely a technical assistance facility and a credit enhancement facility. And I think it's best to, the geographical focus of this fund, and this is a regional fund, is currently largely in South America and in South Asia, where they've kind of funded projects in India. I think it's better if I talk about a case that this has actually done. It'll kind of explain how it works in terms of credit enhancement. So in India, there's a company called SAEL that is actually implementing multiple agri-waste to energy projects. And in northern India, this is a big issue because the agri residue gets burnt after harvest, which results in air pollution. So to convert agri residue into energy is a huge climate benefit. However, agri residue, because the harvesting happens once or twice a year, you have to buy all your raw material for the entire year, either once or twice a year. So there is a huge working capital requirement. And to get that working capital upfront, which was $20 million in this case, Agri Fund actually gave a partial credit guarantee up to 75% of the facility to a commercial bank to lend the working capital to SAEL so that they could buy out all the agri residue during the harvest once a year, right? So this is, and when you do guarantees, as you all probably know, you don't really need all the money, but you need a reserve fund, and you could leverage a guarantee depending on what the risk assessment is 8 to 10 times. I've even seen guarantees leveraged 12 times in there. So a small sum of money can actually get you a far higher impact on the ground. And that is the kind of support that the Agri Fund provides. Let me move on to the Brazil Amazon Fund. And this is a platform that the government of Brazil created in 2009. And the primary objective was really reduction of deforestation and reduction of forest degradation. That was the key objective of creating this platform. The couple of points that I want to make here is one, that you would see from the way, and this is from 2009 to 2018, the slide in terms of what's the size and scale of resources that came into this fund and was invested in the forest management. It takes some time in the initial years for the platform to build capacity for project pipeline development and so on and so forth. But once that is done, it kind of really spikes up. The second point, and therefore I think in the initial years, we need some patience and upfront investment in capacity, in project pipeline development, etc. The second point that I want to make is this data is till 2018 because the government in Brazil changed in 2018. The next government that came in 2019 decided to use the money available, and this is one of the points that Rohan was making, that if there is a nice corpus of money, many people in the government can't resist the temptation of using it for what it was not meant to be. I already see time's up. Okay, let me try and wrap this. So the next government actually tried to use this sum of money for land expropriation, which was not the original cause or not the original objective of this fund. So the donors, as you would see, the government of Norway was the largest donor to this fund. They stopped putting the money in. When the next government came in 2023 and they started using the money for protection of forest, the funds have started flowing in again. So 24 and 25, we've seen some money come back. The reason I'm telling this little story is that it is very important when we look in Sri Lanka, creating structures and platforms like this, that we have a governance network or the legal structure that is strong enough and robust enough where such politically executives cannot necessarily change the large objectives, because once we want to attract international money and leverage international money into funds of this nature, that becomes very important. This is a fund that ADB helped set up in China. This is largely on green finance catalyzing facility, which was basically to finance carbon emission reductions in this province in China called Shandong. The only 2 points I want to make is the amount of leverage that you're able to do on platforms like this. ADB invested $100 million, but got in other development partners to invest another 400 million. So you actually had from 100 to 150 to 500 million to begin with. Additionally, the provincial government, the fund management company, and a couple of municipalities invested in the fund, taking the total to about just a short of $1 billion in the fund itself. And the fund was not financing 100% of the green projects, but it was financing a part, 30, 40, or 50% of the project cost. So you were leveraging private, institutional, and commercial money back into the projects, right? So ultimately, $1 of a sovereign loan was actually getting something like $6 or $7 of money on the ground in the project. And that is something that I think ADB helped do in Shandong and China. I'm really going to move through this to the last slide that I have, which is, creating these funds, and there are many examples, we didn't necessarily cover all of them, but I think some of the key learnings of what it takes to create a fund like this, more importantly, to have these funds operate in the manner they're supposed to operate and deliver the impact that they should impact. The first is, I think we need a clear national framework and a very strong legal basis on which platforms and funds like this are created. Second, we need to separate strategic kind of vision and strategic oversight of the fund from operational fund management. Operational fund management requires very specific expertise, very specific experience, and they need independence to work on where the funds will go, which will maximize the impact that the funds are supposed to deliver. So have clear impact objectives and give them the independence. I've already talked about robust governance and operating rules that need to be codified, cannot be changed very early in the game. Pipeline and readiness support, because that's what takes the initial time. So I think we need that up and running. The funding windows, start simple, maybe start with just grant money going in, and then start complicating the kind of financial instruments that we can do, whether it's as the capacity of the fund management company builds. Maybe we can add guarantees, we can add concessional loans, we can add partial credit, loans, etc. So we can keep complicating it, but later maybe start simple. And finally, I think one of the key elements that we've heard all morning is that these funds need to be sustainable. They need to be able to carry on perpetually, actually. And probably one of the only ways to do that is to have some revenue source that comes in on a regular basis. And we've been talking about PES. So PES keeps coming into this fund, which then gets leveraged to attract money into the fund, which can be utilized. But with that, let me stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abhijit, for that very, very comprehensive presentation of different types of funding mechanisms, blended financing facilities that have been tried in different countries. And I think it's really creates the right environment for us to think about what we could do here in Sri Lanka under the proposed Canopy Fund. So now to move on, so what would we use these funds for, and what are the types of interventions that we're talking about in the upper watershed area? Earlier in your keynote, Rohan, you mentioned the importance of regional plantation companies and their role in ensuring sustainable land management in the upper watershed area. And we are very fortunate today to have with us here the managing director of Haley's Plantations, which controls and manages, owns 3 different regional plantation companies. And Haley's Plantations has been recognized for its incredible work on sustainability, including being one of the first plantations to be certified as a Rainforest Alliance plantation, and the world's first regen agriculture certified plantation. So this is quite an impressive track record that you have. Prashant, can you just tell us a little bit about what you've been doing, what inspired your RPCs, the Kalani Valley in particular, I guess, or even Talwakele and Horana to do the type of work you've been doing, And where do you see the potential for this sort of initiative of sustainable financing coming in? How can that support the work that you've been doing and scale up the work you've been doing?
Thank you, Sanat. Much has been spoken about the RPCs. Just to put the whole thing into context, Sri Lanka has about 267,000 hectares of tea, of which the organized sector that I represent, we cultivate about 66,000 hectares all over the island. So we have tea in Uva, mid-country, low-country, and basically in the up-country, probably about 25,000 hectares. So I don't know what percentage of that is represented in the whole agricultural mix. So that's something that we need to think about. But in the plantation sector in particular, I can give the assurance that soil, water conservation, and ecosystem maintenance has become and is critical to us because ours is an industry. Ours is a vegetative crop harvested every 7 days. And over 150 years, we have been harvesting the same bush practically every 7 days and subjecting it to a very severe cultural work called pruning every 4 or 5 years. So had we not done the right agriculture in terms of soil, water conservation, I don't think the tea bush should have lasted as it is doing. So that's the background. We are very conscious of the fact that, particularly, I speak not for myself, but as a representative of the RPCs, starting from Horton Plains, all the major tributaries of the Mahavalley, like Agrayo, Kotmale, and even Vigoya in the rubber estates, contribute to a very significant national cause. One is the hydroelectricity, other one is a downstream paddy cultivation, of which I think 40% of agricultural labor, 1.5 million households are dependent on. So basically not for that reason, but initially plantations did these things because it is critical for our business, because without soil, without water, there is no tea. So I just want to give the assurance that over the years, as we have done in the past, that we continue to maintain good soil, good water, and good land use practices. In the past, maybe 20, 30 years ago, one of the most disturbing thing was replanting where soil disturbance was very evident for a short period of time. Now we are not doing that large scale replanting, so that fact is also taken away. The ground is exposed only for a limited number of probably 2 months when we do pruning every 5 years. So rest of the year, we have ground cover, we have the well manicured tea, 100% bush cover, as you have seen in many photos. Then we have a green manure cover, then we have a medium shade cover and high shade cover. And added to that, we have programs to maintain rivers, streams, ravines, boundaries, hill crests, the little forest areas. So it's a total system. We are not only looking after the tea extent of which probably 1/4 of our land area. So it is part and parcel of our business strategy to look after the soil and the water and the ecosystem in order that we be in continued business. Because apart from the business angle, we host 1 million, we means RPC sector, host 1 million population in our plantations. So they are sort of what drinking needs, sanitation needs are also taken into account when you are protecting the water sources and everything associated. That is the reason why from the JDB times, as I can recall, riverbeds, borders have been planted with bamboo, protective measures have been taken. So we are just continuing the good work that was done before us, and probably with modern technology and more knowledge that we have now, are doing it better.
Okay. Thank you very much. So just to follow up and to ask a related question now, Haley's Plantations has done a lot of great work on regenerative agriculture and even sustainability linked work. What would inspire other plantation companies to follow the same practices? And is there a motivational need for an incentive-based system to inspire others to do the same things that you have? In the case of Haley's Plantations, it's probably been because of sort of vision and a corporate social responsibility. But is there a gap? Is there a missing element for others to do the same?
Yes, I do agree that, as I mentioned earlier, most of the plantation companies are replicating what we are doing in different degrees, but there is a shared responsibility. while we maintain our area under control. Beyond the estate, we see with our own eyes horrible things happening. The vegetable cultivation is right up to the riverbank. Dwellings, sometimes holiday resorts and hotels are right up to the riverbank, and there's little we can do because they have got government permits and approvals. So my belief is that there should be some minimal, at least a minimal enforcement of the existing regulations regarding soil conservation, river protection, minimal. And I believe like the police stations have the environmental protection officer, it's time that they have a sustainability enforcement officer, at least with some basic knowledge of agriculture. What is done, you cannot avoid. Because if you go to New Orleans, in my career, I have seen the forest border was up to the Nanway Road. Now you can see it about a mile, and vegetable cultivation, that is the biggest contributor to the soil erosion and water misuse, is almost at 60-degree angles. And they are very seasonal. So I think in research, we have to delineate the perennial agriculture and seasonal agriculture for us to get the real results and to study the impacts.
Thank you.
And of course, payment for ecosystems. Yes, we carry a disproportionate burden in maintaining the waterways, riverine system. I think it's nice if CB and other users contribute. We don't want free money, but if they can give the money to the plantation companies that are well-established administrative and management network, we can ensure that planting is done according to recommendations. Now, for example, we have a program of 1 million trees planting cooperating, partnering the Rotary. So they give us some amount of funds, but we plant and maintain and we inventorize, we sort of measure, we monitor. So you can be assured that at least 90% success rate is there within a control system.
Thank you very much, Roshan. Let's move to another good practice of conservation work in the upper watershed area. And I'm like to ask, we have here with us Mr. Sriyan De Silva Vijayaratne. Sriyan is a business transformation practitioner with a conservation background, a corporate leader and a social catalyst. And he was formerly the president of the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society and chairman of a very interesting program called Plant, which has been doing some great work on restoration of degraded areas in the upper watershed area. Sriyan, can you talk a little bit about what you've done under Plant? And again, what are the constraints that you see for scaling up that sort of work? Because that's the type of conservation work that we see as the to address this problem of sustainable land management that we need to do in the upper watershed.
Thank you, Sanat. Good morning, everyone. So I represent the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society. And, long before, not long before, but 2020, before watersheds became the buzzword, we realized that we need to protect the watersheds. So we began a program, set up an entity called Plant, and started raising funds. Interesting model. We brought together landowners. Roshan was a pioneer who put his hand up and signed up the whole estates under them. We brought in donors and we ran the programs of restoration. So it's a three-party, very different model. And what we started doing was three things. We wanted to establish private conservation in the country. We wanted to drive it at scale. And we wanted to make it a multi-partner engagement. So this kind of took off. And as a result of the combinations of work, today we are actually restoring about 60 kilometers of forest corridor. Most of it is in the riverine areas. We have 6 plantation companies that we are working with. And we work exclusively almost in those spaces around protecting the land banks of the waterways, which Rohan was also talking about. So the model has become very interesting for us. And Dr. Mani spoke of a lot of steps ending up with a conservation outcome. We jumped all the conversation and said, let's start the conservation outcome. Let the conversation catch up. The good news is payment for economics services, environmental services is already in place. We have about 40 donors. We have 40 odd locations that we are working, and the amount of money they give is really not of what it takes to put a plant on ground. They're giving 5, 6, 7 times that because they understand the value of the ecosystem. So they're not funding a plant, they're funding the whole body of work. So it's become a model which I think if we can scale, there would be huge benefits for all this work we are talking about, but therein lies the problem. How do we scale? Because we have to raise our own funds. There is no sustainable funding mechanism. And today, if we were to follow the traditional mechanisms of running a tender to see who will do this, definitely there'll be 100 people who come and say, give me a cost of a plant plus a bit more, I'll take that. I'll put a plant on ground, they'll go away. The project will fail in 10 years, but we would have followed a structure. So I think as part of innovation, we'll have to think through these. One of the challenges I do see, I did a bit of a article recently and I called it the gap trap, which is that if you look at the conservation need and look at all the slides which got put up, we need to see action on ground. If you want to protect the forests and the soil, something has to happen on ground. But the percentage of funding going for action on ground, unfortunately, is very different to the need. So I'll just take an example. If we were to need 30% of all monies to be put onto on-ground action, today when we look at all the work we do and the big fundings, a large proportion goes into the research conversation, the workshops, the awareness, the monitoring, etc., etc., etc. We have a single-digit flow down, trickle down to the actual conservation. So I think if we address this gap trap in smart ways and look at different means of fund allocation, not follow your traditional means of the cheapest and all of that, look at competencies and partnerships, then I think we can make all of this real very fast because we have been doing this on ground for the last few years. So let me stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you also elaborate a little bit on the social dimension of the work you're doing, which is actually a very important one. And Rohan just pointed out to me that our technical discussions did not touch on the social aspect, which is actually a very important one. Now, in the case of the work that you do, you engage communities to develop, to actually produce the plants that you need for your work. So there's a huge potential for this sort of work to generate jobs, create opportunities for rural communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things we found when we started this work is that there's no plant availability because we work with very specialized native plants for each area. So what did we do? We approached donors and set up female owned and run plant nurseries. And we fully funded them and we are buying all the plants they produce. We are employing females in them as well. So that suddenly you're taking care of so many families and their livelihood. Plus they have a guaranteed marketplace for so many years. But the more interesting thing is, as we went along, we are now finding that donors are interested in funding community work as well. So we are running a large amount of community programs in their estates, benefiting their people, funded by a bank or a corporate donor, who's also very keen that communities are engaged. So this doesn't need a lot of convincing. People know that we have to work with communities. So today a certain portion of all the funding we are raising is articulated as a community initiative in addition to the restoration. So we're taking the communities along on this journey. So this is kind of a new model that the WNPS has been evolving. We're probably the pioneer on this and certainly the largest on scale on ground, but it wouldn't have been possible if not for the multi-partner engagements. So this is not something that we are doing. We are facilitating, but for the first time, we are bringing competing banks and other donors onto a platform with a broader picture than just saying, let's go and plant some trees. And I think that's the answer. Programs that can scale, multi-partner, partnership.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think these two examples or narratives of what is happening on the ground are really inspirational, and the type of things that we want to see happening through this program, the Canopy Fund and the new intervention by the government. To move back to the Canopy Fund, which is something that the government has been trying to set up We are very fortunate to have this here, Ms. Sashini Vitana, who is a Deputy Director from the Department of External Resources and has been involved in enhancement of blended financing mechanisms in Sri Lanka since 2022. And she's been one of the people working behind the scenes and at the front of, in a sense, of setting up this Canopy Fund. Sashini, can I ask you, we heard earlier from Rohan about funds that have not done what they were supposed to do for various reasons, and how there are a lot of lessons to be learned of what not to do. How can we ensure that the Canopy Fund that is being set up now will be different and that it will actually achieve the outcomes that we want through this program?
Thank you for that question. Canopy Fund, as you gave in the introduction, the work that we did with regard to the Canopy Fund is back in 2022. And all of this started because we wanted to have more private sector participation in climate action, including adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and what is related to loss and damage financing. So in that regard, we actually screened for the development of the National Climate Finance Strategy over 140 solutions. And it's from out of these solutions, we have finally identified 12 solutions, and that is in the strategy. So that's initial three-tier screening was passed by the fund. And then we had closed group discussions, and it ultimately evolved as a climate and nature positive investment fund. And Dr. Pethiagoda informed the flows in the funds that we have in Sri Lanka, so I'm not going to repeat, but I'm going to build on that and say how the climate and nature positive fund, the Canopy Fund, is different from other funds. So it's basically, as the name says, it's for investment. So it's to generate more climate finance and mobilization from the private sector, apart from the support that we have for climate action through the national budget. And how we are going to do is now the broad contours that we present to the Cabinet of Ministers outlines that the fund has a capability to provide guarantees, viability gap financing, and other mechanisms like personal capital guarantee that can actually have provide more incentive for private sector to participate in climate-related actions. Now, that additionality is not available in other statutory funds. And then the multiplier effect. The fund is not to accumulate money and then whatever the surplus to be transferred to the consolidated fund. It has the reinvestment capacity. The fund will be reinvesting in other green climate and nature positive green investments, and then be generating revenue, and it will be sustainable. It won't be surviving on the budgetary support alone. Then, so the 1 rupee that you have in the fund is never going to be a 1 rupee. It's going to be more than 1. That's a multiplier effect. Then, most importantly, the fund is not decided by the Department of External Resources. We pioneered the actions, and we had the support from the Department of National Planning and all the government agencies, the chambers, bank, financial institutions. We had consultations with all of them. They decided that they wanted the fund. It's never something pushed down the throat and said, we are going to establish it. It was what all the stakeholders wanted, and we are finally having it. And about the drafting aspect, it's not the legal drafting that we have a legal consultant appointed through the assistance we have from the UNDP. And apart from that, for the first time in Sri Lanka, we have a consultant, financial consultant from the ADB to decide how the funding mechanism, the reinvestment mechanism, and how the successful operations of a fund could be managed through the proposed Canopy Fund. And that also says about it's a first for Sri Lanka. And what Dr. Peter correctly mentioned is that the funds that we have in Sri Lanka are just pot of monies. They don't reinvest, they don't leverage, they don't have any of that aspect, but the Canopy Fund has that. So I think these are few of the things that I would like to shed some light on. And as we move on, if there are other questions, I'll answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sashini. Yeah, I think it's encouraging to hear that the Canopy Fund is actually drawing on lessons and trying to change or to do things differently. One point that Rohan made earlier was the measurement of performance or should be based on KPIs, and KPIs should be outcome oriented, not process oriented. So if you're measuring the fund's performance based on increased area under sustainable land management, that would be good. If you're measuring it against number of permits approved, that would be bad. So those are the type of things that I think we can actually help and work together on trying to establish this fund to be an efficient and effective fund. To move on, we're very fortunate today to have with us Mr. Russell Aponso, who is the senior additional secretary to the Presidential Secretariat, and who has been really behind the establishment or the move to establish a new authority for the upper watershed management area. And it's also a coincidence, but a very fortunate coincidence, that he also wears the hat of acting secretary for power and energy right now, which actually is very helpful in that we're talking about payment for ecosystem services from potentially hydropower operators. May I ask you, Mr. Ponso, to talk a little bit about the motivation and the vision of the Upper Watershed Management Authority that is being led by the Presidential Secretariat, and how you see the financing from the Canopy Fund feeding into that?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for asking this question. Yes, I am involved in the establishing Upper Watershed Management Authority in one side, and again, when you are talking about the Canopy Fund, then I am also giving my some inputs to them. But if you ask me, then how these two complement each other, this question can be answered in looking at the different angles. The most of you are here is the technical people. All of you know the financial matters, and the others knows the technical matters covered in the upper watershed management. Therefore, then I am not going to look at that angle. But may I look at it the different angle, like how the policy level, they're looking at both of these two innovations. Then if I focus on the Ditwa, when from the time to Ditwa hit to the country to what we are experiencing now, from this time period, then all of your technical matters are giving the answers, the why we couldn't able to minimize the damage, to how we are going to recover quickly. When the policy will ask these questions, then we didn't have the mechanism. Say when we have any kind of disaster, we have a disaster management center, we have a act, everything is there. That is for disaster management. Then we use those provisions. Yes, within these provisions, the government made the measures to make the efficiency. Then it handled in a different way. From the rescue and relief part, covered quickly. Then in the traditional terms, then the recovery. The government gave the new word, rebuilding. rebuilding is the recovery plus something. But it did not happen as the government wish. The difference is the time. Then the government understand the lacking is the guidelines for how to collect funds, how to utilize funds. When we are talking about the early actions, that means the resilience actions, if we had taken, again, the answer is yes, we have some projects. The time to time we concern it as loans, as grants, we received them, we have implemented, but nothing has completed. It has taken time. From the other side, again, then why we couldn't quickly utilize these funds? When all of these questions are asked, the government gave an answer also. The answer is the rebuilding fund. The rebuilding fund. Then if you look at the canopies ideas, everything in the rebuilding funds. Again, the same idea, but looking at the different angle. How the society taken this one. When the rebuilding fund is suggested in the policy or political angle, all the things came looking at that angle, that's criticized. It is not the reason to not to happen, but there are so many other reasons. Internationally, how the international community moved at that time, the Russia-Ukraine war was there. Then the later, it is the short run, then the long run and the medium run. Again, the Middle East war came. Then everyone's attention went on there. Then anyway, finally, it was not happen as we wish. But when we are bringing the canopy plan, it is not by the politicians, so the policy angle, it is just the technical angle. Looking at the technical and all the international communities, international donor agencies, in the technically they are assisting, then in the country, all of the academia and the industry, the other officials are giving their input to it. But if it happened in the earlier, then there is no doubt, then we have already the recover, or we are the moving with the required the efficiency in the rebuilding one. But anyway, now I think the policy level also understand, when the policy level asks why we can't quickly did this rebuilding fund, but now we can understand then how much time we have taken for this one, even for the input from all of these kind of forum, right? It is taking time, but anyway, now I think looking at the future, for any more disasters, because disasters we can't stop. The disasters will come. We can't manage them, but we can manage the preventing one. Then early action taken for the resilient. Then all the features included to financing the canopy fund. On the other hand, upper watershed management, that is not covering the entire country. It is just cover the upper watershed management. There are so many reasons behind it. The technically, all of you know why we are looking at the upper watershed management. Then now government need the quickly establishing these two innovations. That's why one of my duty also. Then I am committed on this one. I wish all of the people gathering here looking at the different angle, giving their inputs in the different ways, all are giving their commitments to establish both of these two innovation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ponso. Yeah, I mean, no one wishes ill on a country, but in this case, DITWA actually was an eye-opener for Sri Lanka, and as you pointed out, a lesson of how to be better prepared for future disasters, which are bound to come, and how a structure like a canopy fund needs to be developed over time through proper consultative process. And the Rebuild Sri Lanka was an example of the difficulty of trying to do that when a disaster actually happened. So we have this opportunity to learn from those lessons and actually establish this mechanism as a preventive and a preemptive mechanism for the future. I would like to ask the audience to post any questions that you have on the chat on the WhatsApp chat group that's been created for this panel. But in the meantime, let me just continue to ask a couple of more questions from our other panelists. We have here today also Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara, who is UNDP's country economist and is working at the intersection of economic policy, climate, and nature finance, and has been working a lot to support the work on the climate finance strategy in Sri Lanka with the support of UNDP. And of course, the Canopy Fund is a spin-off of the climate finance strategy. Vagisha, you are constantly interacting with donors and discussing grant funding. There's an expectation amongst many that the type of work that we're talking about here in Sri Lanka for the upper watershed should come out of grant funding, and that the Canopy Fund should only be using grant funding. But we know that the landscape of grant financing in the world is also changing, it's evolving. Can you share some insights of how that's evolving and how we can adjust and take this evolving nature of grant funding as an opportunity here in Sri Lanka through the Canopy Fund?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Sanat. Good morning to all of you. 3 brief points from UNDP perspective. As you said correctly, the first point, the financing landscape is changing. And this is a point that we must recognize quite explicitly. What I mean by that is the grant funding globally, by 2024, compared to 2023, it had declined. Grants have declined 6%. Then bilateral grants, if you look at 2025 numbers, nearly a 30% decrease in bilateral grants. So grants, the trend is that grants are becoming scarce, right? And they're also becoming, the use of grants are they're being used more strategically. That's another trend. Of course, Sri Lanka, it's understandable, given the debt position, there is a preference for grants. But I think the reality is quite different globally. And go back to the second point about using grants more strategically. Grants are now being used for, say, to provide guarantees for project preparation, for viability gap financing. They are used to unlock larger volumes of financing, and especially in the climate and nature sectors, the financing need is huge, and it cannot be filled by grants. Everyone's comfortable, I think, to receive a grant, put it in an impressed account, carry out the project activities, report on them, and then close the project. But that doesn't allow for any scale in this current context of grants, which is becoming scarce. And we are globally, we are using these in a more strategic way. Now, UNDP and Convergence, we did a survey in South and Southeast Asia on blended financing, something that you extensively spoke about. There are over 345 blended financing transactions in this region. amounting to about $56 billion. This was as of last year. Indonesia's SDG 1 is a platform that UNDP has worked on, and that is a fund that was supported by the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia. It's operated by one of their state-owned entities, and that attracts all types of financing. So private capital, public funds, concessional financing, philanthropy, and so on. So there are examples in the region where they are using grants to unlock more financing. Unpublished, I think, numbers of what we require for Sri Lanka for mitigation sectors is about $10 billion. These are unpublished figures. For adaptation sectors, it's about $4.8 billion, right? So we can't even think of public money, being used. We don't have this kind of public money to be used for mitigation and adaptation. Hence the need for blended financing. Lastly, I want to kind of respond to close off on your question by reducing an intervention to three things. One, I think Sri Lanka needs pipelines. Investors are not going to invest in strategies. They need investable projects. So building that is important. Second is we need a platform. And I'm so glad, Sashi, you mentioned that we should not think of Canopy as just another government funding. It is intended to attract all sources of financing. So therefore, we should think about it as a national financing infrastructure for climate and nature positive investments. So that the way we structure it is quite important then to work with private philanthropy and all kinds of potential investments. Lastly, the partnerships. I think the IFIs, other development partners, private sector, philanthropy, all of us, we bring in different skill sets and also different risk appetites. And for upper watershed management and investment in that, I think we need all of them. So I think the point I want to leave you with today about grants is that we have to transition from, of course, our preference might be grants, but having a preference is not a financing strategy, especially when the global environment is shifting. So we have to move from that mindset to creating a national financing infrastructure for climate and nature investments.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I think as you pointed out, the landscape for financing is changing, evolving. And what's also happening increasingly is the private sector recognizing the need to pitch in because it affects their bottom line. It's the supply chains for most agricultural products. I mean, if you take Sri Lanka, for instance, one of the motivations for plantation companies should be that if you don't invest in your infrastructure, natural infrastructure, your production levels would drop, and eventually it would affect the bottom line and profits. So, but for the private sector to come in to invest in things like nature, which are long-term, high risk, you need underlying risk management through grants and other types of public finance, and that's how we can actually structure this here. Moving on, last but not least is my colleague Sumit, who is Mr. Sumit Pokhrel, who is a senior natural resource management specialist with ADB and is based here in Colombo and is responsible for supporting the agriculture, food and nature and rural development sector here. Sumit comes with an extensive experience of doing natural resource management work in other parts of the world, including the Greater Mekong sub-region, where he was instrumental in developing a program for biodiversity conservation of the overall Mekong region. Sumit, let's to wrap up and to sort of come back to how ADB supports this whole initiative on upper watershed restoration. Can you speak a little bit about the program that's in our pipeline, in ADB's pipeline, and how we see that moving, supporting the government moving forward. Thank you, Sarah. Is it audible?
Okay. And good afternoon, everyone. So again, it's been a very wonderful discussion so far. And again, we do see a lot of momentum on watershed, upper watershed, from the financing side of things, from the governance side of things, including the authority. So there is a program that is being developed right now in our pipeline for potentially next year, depending on how quickly can we move. It's called Sri Lanka Upper Watershed Ecological Restoration Program. So that is there. One thing probably I would want to emphasize is we are looking at public goods, right? So upper watershed. So there is no denial. There is a public goods. There is that aspect to that, and government traditionally has been financing this kind of intervention. Somebody said earlier, government as the first buyer. Again, it's critical. Again, the seed capital is going to come from the public sector. What we are looking at is changing how this capital is being utilized, right? In past, it has very much seen as a sinking fund because there is a public goods. So, okay, you put the project and over the period of the time that money goes away. Now, the changes that we are looking at right now is changing from that thought process to look into what is the tangible services these investments are created, whether it can create the revenue stream, can we structure in such a way that it becomes sustainable in a long run. So there are few criteria that probably we'll have to look into when we're designing this program. One, it has to be performance-based, right? Because if you're looking at something like this, and there has to be, I think there was a discussion early this morning about key performance indicators, maybe putting in some kind of a metrics. So that is critical. Another thing that is very, very critical is consolidation, right? So again, there are like a lot of ad hoc grants as we are talking about. It's not about the availability of grant that is diminishing, but over the period of time, there is also inefficiency in those grants, how those grants are being utilized in small interventions here and there. And there is a plenty of opportunity to consolidate that. So again, we have to think about the mechanism to consolidate that, but at the same time, also utilizing its leverage ability, right? So again, that is something that, but when we are doing that, it has to be based on evidences. Again, and I think we did hear about some of the work that is being done in terms of like assessments and stuff like that. And there is plenty of those kind of evidence building that is already happening in the country. But now, how do we institutionalize all of these things? And I think that is very interesting aspect that we are finding in this program, the institutionalization through authority, again, consolidating the fragmented mandate that is across different line agencies, institutionalizing it through the fund, again, and creating that long-term sustainability angle to that. But most importantly, I think one thing that probably we didn't discuss enough today is consolidation of knowledge, right? Through the Center of Excellence. There are a lot of universities, think tanks, Peregrina University that we talked about, the students in those universities, the system that could be mobilized. So I think if you look at institutionalization aspect, and that is something that we are bringing in this program through fund, authority, Center of Excellence. So I think that is something that we see value in this program. It will be a challenging process. It's a slow process, and slow is good. Slow is not bad, right? Of course, there is, because then slow means there would be a lot of consultation. There will be ownership, because that is very, very important, because we are talking about different stakeholders across different areas. But that slow is good. but the consultation but also thinking about communities, because at the end of the day, we are talking about them as a beneficiaries. We are thinking them as a change agent. In this case, if we are talking about behavioral shift, it's the community, right? So building that awareness, it will take time. So overall, so I think this program we are really looking forward to. Hopefully by end of next year, we should be able to get it done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sumit. It's also, of course, it's very encouraging for a government to have the backing of a development partner with real cash and contribution of technical and financial support to get something like this started. So I think it's highly appreciated by the government and, of course, the civil society as well. We are extremely good with time, and we've just reached our limit. Time's up, it shows here. But I would like to maybe just take a few minutes to open the floor, and if there are any questions from the audience. Unfortunately, I'm the only one who's been asking questions so far. But are there any burning questions? There is one on the chat box, and I can ask that. But we just ask if anyone in the audience has any questions. Or until you come up with one, maybe let me ask this question that's come up on the chat group. So how do you see the Canopy Fund taking on board and incorporating instruments such as bonds and ensuring the use of proceeds from issuances are used in categories associated with building resilience and bolstering adaptation? I think this is a question for maybe if you can start with it, and maybe we can help you.
Yes, I must thank for this question answer, because in the earlier round, I deliberately stopped myself from commenting on KPI Dr. Petiagoda brought up, because the KPI for the Canopy Fund is quite different from the KPI for the other funds. Now, this concentrates on the KPIs for the fund. So the bond is one of the instruments that we propose that the fund issues. And to issue bonds like for climate and nature positive investments, we need thematic bond frameworks. So we have, with assistance from GGGI and also UNSCAP, developed green bond framework for sovereign bond issuances, which is useful, and perhaps now that the NDC 2.0 is out, we need to revise it and get a renewed SPO and bring it up to a usable condition. Now, there we have eligible categories for green bonds and also blue bonds. And for the different eligible categories, there are different measures of levels of achievements that we have identified in the bond framework. So those are the KPIs. So basically what we do with climate and nature positive investment is bring out responsible and responsible reporting by measuring impact that the funds that is provided to the money that is provided to the fund is utilized to generate a tangible benefit to the country. So that is how we are handling the KPI aspect. And the use of proceeds, the beauty of this fund is that we allow the fund to ring-fence money. So once we issue a bonds, the use of proceeds, or rather the bonds proceeds that we gather, can be ring-fenced in a particular account and used for the pre-identified purpose. That is what the bond prospects would identify, and governed by the broader bond framework. And that is also there. So other issues, other proceeds that we are considering to maneuver through the fund includes, like Dr. Vagish also said, the impact fund, the other climate financing funds, the philanthropic funds, also carbon and biodiversity credits. All of this can be ring-fenced. And then we can, for that particular use, we can publish a report and say, this is how we utilized your funds. So there's a lot of governance mechanism, apart from the advisory council, board of directors, then the CEO, the secretariat. Apart from that governance that the legal structure would provide, there's also this reporting, mandatory reporting aspect that we have undertaken through the Canopy Fund to give more credibility to all the activities the fund will provide. I think that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we might have time for one more question. Again, I'll check in the audience if there is anyone. There is one question from the audience. Please, do you have a mic?
Thank you very much. I'm Nelun Gunasekar, and I'd like to pick up, well, I actually have two questions. One is just picking up a particular point addressed by starting with CD Canon Shaolin and then Dr. Pethiagut and other speakers, also the importance of communities in these affected areas. I mean, we tend to see them either as perpetrators, responsible for, bad land use and resulting in landslides or bad land, agricultural practices, or as victims, of natural disasters. But I think to what extent have the studies that have been done looked at them as agents who can make a very positive contribution in the restoration, the sustainable management of upper watersheds? Because first we need the evidence to show what their role and responsibilities are, what their roles have been thus far, which tend to be negative, but what roles they can play positively. And I think Sriyan's contribution on plant and, working with local women in terms of tree planting and things. That is a small initiative. It's a very valuable initiative. But first, I'd like to see what the evidence is in terms of studies done that shows the extent to which humans are involved in the degradation, but also what humans have been doing from positive examples in terms of restoration and management, because we can't leave it to government authorities or the private sector or whatever it is to do this kind of thing. We have to actually engage with people at the ground level. So, I mean, that sort of information I think is very valuable. The second question I have is, what would be the appetite of the corporate sector, which does have a little pot of money put aside for CSR, to actually think more in terms, in the longer term, in investing in something like this, because this is not going to take 2 years or, 3 years. It's going to take 15 to 20 years. So unless the corporate sector has an appetite to invest in this kind of thing and reasonable sums of money, not a little bit, for a little CSR project, what would be the appetite that we can see thus far, and how can we, build on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good question. I think from the panel, perhaps that question should be posed to our first speaker, Roshan, or to Sriyan, because you've had the experience of working on the ground, and I think the question is about what is the role and what is the current trend of communities actually being involved in some of this sort of work, conservation work.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one. I speak for the perennial sector, that is a plantation crop sector, because by necessity, we have to sell about 95% of what is overseas. We don't have a local market. There are certain conformities, compliances, and impositions imposed on us by the buying community, that is a global community. So as a part of that, we have to be certified. For example, Rainforest Alliance, Forest Stewardship Certificate, Eco-Label, plethora of those. Sometimes overlapping, sometimes repetitive, but we have no choice in order to be in business and in order to be in continued business, you have to do that. So as a part of that process, by necessity and by requirement, we do a lot of conservation, soil, water, ecosystem, biodiversity, natural resources. So there is a conformance aspect. In doing that, because we deal with a hugely, the levels of awareness and education at ground level was minimal. But as a part of this certification process, we have to have extensive awareness, coaching, training programs with our ground level, that is the manual worker level. And now sometimes auditors independently test them. So I can say first step is awareness in doing all this. And I must confidently say that the workforce and the communities are fully aware, sometimes over-aware to our detriment, fully aware of what needs to be done, what protective actions that they have to take. And by and large, Sri Lanka has had a reputation as the world's most certified tea industry. So that part is okay. As a sort of corporate entity, we realize the importance of nature, soil, water for the business that we are engaged in, perennial agriculture, particularly vegetative agriculture. So there is no choice. I mean, as an intelligent manager, anyone with the plantation would see the necessity of doing things in order that the business continues in a, how shall I say, pressure-free environment. So I think corporate sector, these things are not cheap, I must say that, because from the head office level, we have to have sustainability managers, highly qualified teams, reporting, annual report requirements. Sometimes it's really burdensome, but as I confessed earlier, we have no choice, we have to do it. So since we have to do it, we might as well do it willingly and go the extra step and do it with some commitment and interest. So that is our approach. So let me finish by saying that the it's not pocket money really, it's huge sums of money, which has a significant impact on our cost of production. And for example, it interlocks. For example, if you don't have good soil, now fertilizer, which is more than 10% of our cost of production, is a waste. So we understand the sort of synergy in having good soil, having good water, carrying away excessive water, and it's a part and parcel of a total systems management. I would put it like that.
May I? Yeah, so let me pick up on that a little bit. When we, the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, when we approached our work there, we had no choice. We had to look at communities as part of the solution, because we can't make that judgment, even though we can see that they are perpetrators and victims in different cases. Our mandate dictates that we make them part of the solution. So we've been approaching a lot of our work on that basis, but I want to point to an interesting project that we are doing targeting this whole appetite. Right now, we understood that some of this work is impacting children in a big way. So we actually worked with a German organization on child rights and looked at how badly children's rights are being affected by climate change in the hill country. Because every time you flood, they can't access school, they lose their homes, they lose livelihood, etc., etc., etc. And we did research to showcase that child rights are being violated. And then we launched a 5-year program, just started, to actually build an entire community led by the children. So we're picking about 300 children in Bogon, Talav and those areas, and we're just investing a total of about 160 million on those children, and through the children on community projects, and through their families on sustainability related initiatives which will do environmental protection in those areas. And building awareness, we want to create 5-star sustainability and climate change specialists through those kids. So I think appetite is not the problem. It's a question of, do you have the vision and the willingness to create the programs, and then go to the partners and put your hand up and say, can you support us? Here's our vision for these children, for these communities, for these areas. And I think WNPS, we have found that if wherever we put our hand up and came up with a big visionary project, the credentials are there within WNPS for partners to step up and say, we are willing to support. So we've been fortunate, but we have appetite for more. There's no funding. So I think if the funding is coming and somebody were to say, hey, if I could give you $1 million, what would you like to do on this theme? I think we have lots of interesting ideas which are backed by research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The issue of working with communities is central, I think, to everything that we're talking about here. I mean, there was also a question about settlement of people who are living in vulnerable areas and how you would do that. If ADB is involved, it will certainly be done with proper due diligence of ADB's policies on settlement, voluntary or involuntary settlement of communities. But I think beyond looking at the resettlement of people, it's about how to work with communities to make sure that they are part of the solution and not look at them as part of the problem. So I think this could go on for a longer time, this discussion, but in the interest of time, may I bring this panel session to an end. Thank you very much to all the speakers and all the audience for also patiently listening. Just to say that this SKOP event, the very first of these SKOP events was on the same topic of natural capital. And at that time, this was 2 years ago, I think, when we started to talk about the importance of natural capital in Sri Lanka. It's nice to see complete circle back to actually now a session on how these assessments on natural capital are actually translating into an actual implementable program in Sri Lanka. So great credit goes to Hasita from ADB's team that puts on these SKOP events. Thank you very much. With this, I will turn over back to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you also to our very able moderator, Sanath Ranavana. It's not an easy task moderating a panel of this many experts and this number in that sort of a short time. Thank you very much to our panelists too. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now pause just for a few minutes. There is a QR code. We would like you to scan it and please fill in the feedback form. For the virtual participants, it's in your link. Could you please fill it in, because this is what helps us to find out how successful this program has been, what needs to be improved, what we need to think about going forward. Thank you everyone for taking your time to fill up our feedback form. And to make the closing remarks on behalf of ADB, I'd like to invite Director Agriculture, Food, Nature and Rural Development, SD2 of ADB, Mr. Oh Sean Yi, who will be joining us virtually.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? First, let me send my apologies for not being able to join you all today in person. I send my thanks to the distinguished representatives of the government of Sri Lanka, colleagues, partners, and everybody who made time to join today's event. On behalf of the Agriculture, Food, Nature, and Rural Development Sector Office, and of course the Natural Capital and Climate team, I would like to extend my appreciation to all our presenters and panelists and participants today for an insightful dialogue as part of our Serendipity Knowledge Program convened by our Sri Lanka country office. So a big thanks to all the efforts that went in to coordinate and put together today's event. Now, today's conversations reinforced many important elements needed for success. We're not facing a knowledge gap as such about why watersheds and catchments matter. What we've heard today is that the evidence is increasingly clear that a key role to play for watersheds is on sustainable water security, on food production, on energy generation, biodiversity, tourism, and climate resilience. So there's a lot of elements that come around the natural capital asset and a lot of benefits that it brings. So the question is not about whether or not these landscapes are important, but how we can work together to make sure that they get protected, they're restored, and they're properly invested in so that the benefits can be felt for generations to come. The other point of today's discussions was stressing the importance of hydrological and economic cases for action. We've seen that the upper watersheds should not be viewed simply as the environmental assets, but they're indeed productive natural capital. They generate value. They generate support to different sectors of the economy, and they work together in synergy to create impact and to create success for society and for the country. But what we've also heard is the cost of degradation is real and it's in fact growing. And we're feeling it today with a growing number of disasters, natural impacts from natural events, lost productivity, and also, of course, in the context of climate and disaster risks. First, there was other themes as well that came out today. Upper watersheds require a more integrated approach, and we've heard that from most of our speakers and panelists. As I said earlier, the watersheds cut across sectors, institutions, and administrative boundaries. What this means is stronger coordination is needed, better information, clearer accountability, and a point that was stressed by some of our panelists on the importance of governance arrangements. These would be critical for success because this is not a new process. We must learn from what we've done in the past and also make sure that the country context is taken into consideration. Next, the importance of moving beyond fragmented and short-term interventions was also highlighted by a few speakers. The challenge before us is not only ecological restoration, but also how to create the systems that can sustain these efforts in the long term. And again, institutions, financing mechanisms and instruments, incentives, they need to endure beyond individual project interventions and most importantly, I would argue, election cycles. Next, innovation. We've heard today that innovation is also critical. As what we've seen in ADB around the world and around our regions, countries are exploring approaches such as blended financing, PES, natural capital accounts, and outcome-based investments. Now, these experiences have provided valuable lessons, and we've seen that with many of the ADB projects we've been privy to support. But today's dialogue also reminded us that any solution for Sri Lanka must be grounded in local realities and designed around the needs of the local communities and the landholders who are the stewards of the resources, the stewards and the managers of the natural capital assets that will persist over time. We also heard considerable interest in the concepts currently being explored, including the proposed Upper Watershed Area Management Authority and the Canopy Fund. There was recognition that these concepts remain at an early stage, and their effectiveness will depend on broad consultation, as we heard today, with the community, stakeholder ownership, and ensuring that these benefits do reach those that are needing them most, and to maintain these landscapes in the condition that we seek to achieve. Most encouraging I would feel today is that there's a growing convergence of interest around this nature agenda. What we've seen with our discussions with different governments and agencies, the academia and other development partners, is that there's an increasing recognition that healthy watersheds are fundamental, and especially so in the Sri Lanka context, for its resilience and for future economic prosperity. For ADB, today's event is certainly not the end of a conversation. In fact, it's part of an ongoing journey. And in fact, the insights today, I'm confident, will inform the continued development of the proposed Sri Lanka Upper Watershed Ecological Restoration Program and the broader effort to identify practical pathways to scale up these investments in nature and natural capital, which is one of the priorities for our team and for our sector. Let me again return to the theme of today's event, unlocking natural capital for a resilient future. Natural capital creates value only when it's valued, managed, and protected. Sri Lanka has a unique opportunity to demonstrate how these investments in nature can simultaneously strengthen livelihoods, water security, climate resilience, and economic development. But to achieve this, we must all work together in all different spheres of partnership to make sure that there's a commitment and buy-in from the community, through the governments, and through the people that will make these actions on the ground fly. So let me just finish by saying that ADB is proud to be part of this process, proud to support the government of Sri Lanka, and to work with our partners through our country office and all of our stakeholders to try to achieve this important collaboration to achieve long-lasting success. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon.
Very much to the Director of Agriculture, Food, Nature and Rural Development, SD2 of ADB, for rounding off the concluding remarks on behalf of ADB and the discussion we've been having today. And on behalf of the government, I would like to invite Additional Director General, Department of National Planning, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Mr. Rohitha Vikramaratne.
Good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I think today we had a very wonderful discussion. Particularly, I was joined to that forum in a halfway, but I had the opportunity to listen to that discussion, the panel discussion. It was really well, and also wonderful. Lot of new ideas came out in the discussion. And a lot of things I think that Mr. Lee, that from the ADB side, the briefed in the concluding remarks from the ADB side. Anyway, I would like to reiterate few things with regard to this particular the subject area of today's topic. The topic says the invest in upper watershed and also the unlocking the natural capital investment for higher resilience. So that is a timely important the interventions that even in the serendipity, that the name implies that it is something valuable finding, something new finding, something important finding, that the terms itself is giving us some sort of good news for us to proceed. So when we are talking about this upper watershed, I will brief a little bit on this, particularly looking at the investment side. Since I am coming from the finance ministry side, I would like to reiterate this one, because that over the number of past years that we have been largely investing on the downstream development. The attention on the investment in the upper watershed, the upper catchment area is rather low. It's remained low. So if you look at the budgetary figures, even at the project investment, so over the past number of years, past 10 years, past decades, you can see a lot of investment is diverted on the downstream development. So we now understand a lot of consequences. We are facing now a lot of consequences. Therefore, that we have come up with the new the turning point in this particular context. We are really talking about two main things. One is that the establishment of the authority, upper watershed authority. Other one is that the fund. So that is the one. Because that even in the panel discussion, a lot of speakers highlighting that the institutional requirement, a lot of things are being fragmented. So to need to have some sort of a consolidation of all these things being undertaken under different the institution. That is why we are trying to bring up this the authority, whatever the name comes in. So even yesterday also, the full day it was spent. Most of the participants, most of the government officials spent to how to landscape the authority, what is the mandate, and what are the main core functions. All these things were, I think, that we wrap up during the yesterday discussion. So the today discussion, to my understanding, to what I see is that is largely focused on the funding, how do we bring the new financing, the options, the blended financing possibilities to strengthen the canopy fund, right? So ADB, we must thank to the ADB because that the ADB is agreed to, because the country director is also here, they agreed to provide the initial funding for the green our canopy fund. So, but and also we can see a lot of, the possibilities, the grant financing possibilities. But both these, the traditional financing itself won't work this fund throughout sustainable. So in order to make this more sustainable, we need to look at other options as well. We even in few times back that we listened number of the innovative fund financing methodologies, and a lot of from the ADB side, a lot of knowledge was shared with our participants. The things are happening in the global context. India, the Vietnam, the Brazil, and even in China, a lot of things are coming in. So therefore, we have to think about, we need to explore all these possibilities in order to make this fund sustainable. Otherwise, it won't go through. It will be the kind of a project nature intervention. Therefore, we cannot wait, that we have to look at the sustainability. So therefore, that is why that we are having this sort of discussion, this sort of a knowledge sharing event to have more exposure and also to share the experiences within the country and also with in the global context. So before coming to before concluding my the small, the speech, I would like to reiterate three things that was highlighted by the UNDP, Mr. Vagisha. I think that those three things are quite important for us, for our context. That is why I am trying to reiterate this one. The first thing is the pipeline. That is very important. I fully agree with that one, because that we need to have a good pipeline of the project. So we have the project pipeline, but that project pipeline itself won't, the match with for this particular purpose. So therefore, that as the government officers, we need to come up with the good project pipeline. So then only that we can go for the market, to go for the new innovative financing, look for the innovative financing. The second one is the platform, and also that is the nature financing infrastructure. That is what we have to thank to the UNDP as well. We and also the ADB and also a lot of other development partners that supported to develop the infrastructure, the landscape, the requirement, the ground realities, ground requirement in the country. So those are being carried out even now. We have, particularly the ERD also did the larger part of this, and particularly in the Treasury. So jointly with the Department of National Planning. So these things have largely been done, but we have some more things to be undertaken. So these the realities, the requirement need to be completed. So otherwise, even if we discuss a lot the subject, the bringing the new financing, the going for the blended financing mechanism. So all these things need to have the required infrastructure. The final thing she highlighted was that the partnership. That is why we have this similar sort of a forum, and particularly with the ADB, the World Bank, UNDP, all other development partners, JICA, right? They are all supporting for this one, and the partnership with them and also with other the agencies which are providing the grant financing facility are also required to have a good sort of the partnership. Otherwise, that we alone, the government alone, because this is the innovation, the new step that we have taken up. So we need some sort of a partnership at the beginning to get this time in the landscape to mature it. So with that few remarks, I will stop here, because now a lot of discussions went on. From the government side, we also have done the needfuls, particularly for the establishment of the authority. The cabinet has granted the approval, and even for the fund, the cabinet approval has been granted. So the policy level approvals are now already there. So we need to proceed with the remaining requirement. So with that, I will stop here. And before concluding my speech, the closing remark, I must thank particularly to the ADB because they are always behind us, that they are always supporting us. So without the support and also the knowledge that's being shared, so we alone cannot go this journey. And in addition, that all other development partners, UNDP, JICA, World Bank, their support is also highly commendable. So finally, I would thank to all our government officers who are present here, because that I know that they are also in a very busy schedule. So their commitment, their attention for this new initiative is highly appreciated. And also not only that, we need to work on this. This is the starting point of the journey. This is not the end. This workshop is not the end. So this is the starting. So we need to do a lot more to bring new financing, because we can establish the authority. It itself doesn't work unless we don't have the financing mechanism. So therefore, to me, the most important thing is to have a good financing, the funding, what is called the canopy fund. We need to have a lot of other financing going beyond the conventional financing sources. Then we can have a very sustainable financing mechanism parallel to our institutional arrangement. With that, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vikramaratne. Ladies and gentlemen, like it was mentioned, it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared opportunity. By supporting our natural capital of the upper watersheds, it is not just now, it's not just a choice anymore. It is a necessity. With that thought in your head, we close this Serendipity Knowledge series. for today. We invite you to lunch, and we hope it has been a fruitful morning for you. Thank you.